Mike Brown, the former FEMA director.
Joining us here is the former FEMA director.
History, I think, was very unkind to you, my friend. Very unkind.
Mr. Brown, thanks for being with us.
This is Michael Brown Unplugged.
Welcome to this episode of Michael Brown Unplugged. Glad to have you with me. Before I talk about Mexico actually turning into and officially becoming, in my opinion, a narco-state, I want to describe for a moment some of the long-term and forward-thinking planning that goes on within Homeland Security and the Department of Defense. Because there have long been plans, for example, let's focus on Cuba for a second. There have long been plans for when both of the Castros are dead. Now, Fidel's dead, Raul is still alive, but at some point, Raul Castro is going to die. And at the time, I'm thinking back into the 60s, 70s, 80s, in fact, even back into the 2000s, early 2000s, there was concern that depending on when or how the Castro boys decide to assume room temperature, that there would be this flood of refugees and asylum seekers and people just trying to escape Cuba. Now, a lot of that depended upon and made an assumption that the reason that people would be trying to escape Cuba upon the death of one or both of the Castro guys is that there would be another military regime taking over and that people would see that chaos in the transition from the Castros to, another Che Guevara or whatever it might be. That there might be this attempt of as many people as possible to get on whatever they can and once again try to make it to Monroe County, Florida, to Key West. And so how would we deal with all of those people? Because, at the time versus thinking about it now, when we think about it now, we're all thinking, well, we have all these people coming across the southern border between the U.S. and Mexico, and they're seeking asylum when in fact they probably don't qualify for asylum. But what we were considering and what has been considered in planning for DOD, FEMA, and now DHS, Homeland Security, is if there is a failed state, if Cuba were to become a failed state, how would we deal with the flood of those people that would I'm talking about tens of thousands of people coming across and landing in Monroe County, Florida. So we put plans in place of how we would deal with that. How do we house them? How do we take care of them? How do we get them established? Or do we, depending on what's going on in the country, do we house them for a while? Do we house them for a while like we do some now and then return them to Cuba when or if things settle down, or if we're lucky enough, the Castro boys die, and there's actually some form of a democratic republic established on the island of Cuba. I say all of that because while we're so focused, and I think it's the shiny object syndrome, while we're all focused on the left's impeachment fever, I think the real story of the year has largely gone unnoticed, and that is that Mexico has officially become a narco-state. Now, the planning that we did in the past, and the planning that I assume continues is, and I know this is hard to comprehend, but can you imagine if the country of Mexico, economically, politically, socially, in every way possible, collapses? If that were to occur, you have the potential. Mexico has a population of about 126, 127 million people. You face the risk that all of those people, because think of the chaos. I don't know how to paint this picture for you as dramatically as possible. But can you imagine in the United States if we were, and this isn't a perfect analogy because I'm talking about the United States being attacked. If we were attacked and the government was decapitated, or somehow the government just simply collapsed, the economy collapses, we have some sort of external factors that come in and just cause everything that we take for granted to suddenly disappear. Currency, like in Venezuela, the American dollar becomes like the Venezuelan bolivar, and all of a sudden we have inflation of, 1,000,000%. and the dollar bill that you have in your pocket right now becomes worth less than a penny. Think of the chaos. Think of the chaos if, again, using an external attack as an example, think about what would happen if suddenly the power grid goes down. You have inflation, the power grid goes down, the government has failed. Everything that you and I take for granted that keeps the social order and the social compact in place disappears. Utter chaos. Utter and complete chaos. That's the plan for a failed state. Now, I don't think the United States is anywhere nearing a failed state, although I do believe that somewhere in the future, because of our debt that is just unsustainable, that we could face another economic collapse that would be worse than the Depression of the 1920s and the 1930s. But let's go back to Mexico, because the point I want to make about Mexico is this. I believe that Mexico has officially become a narco-state. Last week in the city of Culiacan, I may be mispronouncing that, a de facto army of well-armed thugs from the Sinaloa cartel battled and defeated. Now you think here I'm going to say, what, the local cops, the National Guard? No. These well-armed thugs from the Sinaloa cartel battled and defeated the Mexican military. The battle was precipitated by the capture of Ivan and Ovidio Chapman, the sons of jailed drug kingpin Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. Now, Ivan was quickly freed by his own men after they prevailed over government forces, but he then launched a citywide war to free his brother. 8 people were killed, more than 20 wounded. Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador ultimately ordered the Mexican forces to retreat. And he said, quote, "The capture of one criminal cannot be worth more than the lives of people. This decision was made to protect citizens. You cannot fight fire with fire. We do not want deaths. We do not want war." Well, war is exactly what the president got, whether he wanted it or not. Think about the logic of that. That's essentially saying that if the mafia, the mob, I don't know, the MS-13, let's use MS-13. Let's say that, for example, MS-13 decides that they are going to, and you know, I don't know that this is actually far from reality. If MS-13, which has a presence in probably every major American city in the United States, decided that they were going to organize a well-planned attack in all of those cities. They were going to attack government buildings. They were going to attack the utilities. They were going to attack the telephone system. They were going to attack, the grid. They were going to attack banks. They were going to attack everything. Now, of course, most of these major American cities have what? Chicago, New York, PD, they all have police departments of incredible firepower. But that doesn't mean that the battle couldn't be won, or at some point, can you imagine the mayors of all these cities, or the governors of all those states, or ultimately the president, as happened in Mexico, saying, there are just too many civilians being killed, we're going to retreat? Because that's exactly what the Mexican president said, and that's exactly what the Mexican president did, and the Sinaloa cartel defeated the Mexican army. It kind of begs the question of, so how well organized and well equipped were the cartel members? There's a video that shows 2 men cruising through the city in a custom-built armored vehicle armed with military-grade weaponry. There's another video that shows cartel members with more heavy weapons, including anti-tank launchers. Reports out of Mexico indicate that cartel mercenaries targeted Mexican security forces with 14 separate attacks, leading to the capture of those 8 soldiers who were held hostage and whose families were subsequently kidnapped also. The cartel forces erected 19 blockades to prevent additional military and police from responding. Now, while the battles raged, a lot of inmates escaped from a nearby prison. So now let's take that story and let's apply it to the United States. I really want to focus on Mexico, but I think to paint the picture, to help you understand exactly what's going on in Mexico, we need to think about it in terms that we understand, that we live with every day. So let's walk through those videos again. Imagine in a major American city, or numerous American cities, because this is how I think terrorists would operate, and this is exactly how I think cartels would operate. So now you have MS-13 cruising through, and because I'm sitting in Denver, let's just use Denver, cruising through Denver in custom-built armored vehicles with military-grade weaponry. And because it's a surprise attack, they attack the government buildings. Of course, I wouldn't attack the government buildings first. I would attack banks, power stations, substations. I would attack those things first to bring down the power. Then I would go after the government buildings. Imagine that happening in Denver. Suddenly, the entire Front Range is without power. So everybody thinks, well, so Michael, we would be able to respond to that because, the governor would activate the National Guard, and the National Guard would come in and seize control in the city, take control of Denver. Okay, well, let's imagine that this is a coordinated attack, and in the top 20 cities in the United States, similar attacks occur at similar times. They start at noon, East Coast, and 9 o'clock Pacific. Simultaneous. Now you have those 20 cities. I'd have to go back and see what the top 20 cities are. But let's say the top 20 cities are in 35 different states. So now you have the National Guard called out in 35 different states. You still have Posse Comitatus. So the United States military may or may not, now legally I think they could, because I would see this as an attack by a foreign enemy on American soil, and I think the president would immediately waive Posse Comitatus, activate the military. But imagine that. Imagine now we have war zones in American cities. Let's go back to the videos. The other video, the second video that I watched, showed cartel members with heavy weapons, including anti-tank launchers. So now you've got guerrilla warfare going on in all of these cities. And then you have mercenaries. So now other gang members from other gangs begin to join MS-13. And now you have these attacks everywhere, and civilians are being killed left and right. Now, I certainly don't think Donald Trump would wave the white flag like the Mexican president said, and claim that, the capture of one criminal cannot be worth more than the lives of people. I think Donald Trump would be like, okay, you mess with us, bring it on. We're going to wipe you out. But imagine the destruction that takes place in doing that. So that's what happened in this town of Culiacan. The Sinaloa cartel battled and defeated the Mexican military. So what was the final outcome? The 8-hour battle ended when government forces, outgunned and surrounded, no reinforcements or a way to retreat, got an order directly from President Obrador to release the prisoner, to release the one prisoner and to surrender. Now, unsurprisingly, Reuters tried to establish a link between the cartel's success and Donald Trump. This is how absurd the world's gotten. Reuters wrote, to boost security, López Obrador, the president, has created a new National Guard. But thousands of that militarized police forces members have instead been sent to contain illegal immigration through Mexico at the behest of U.S. President Donald Trump. Oh, Les, of course. The Mexican military surrenders and gives up, and we're going to blame Donald Trump. But wait a minute. When Reuters says that thousands of that militarized police force's members have been sent to contain illegal immigration, what about human trafficking? What about terrorists? In May of last year, then Secretary of Homeland Security Kirstjen Nielsen told Congress that the cartels were making at least $500 million per year simply smuggling illegals into America. So it seems to me that the Mexican military, in cooperation with the U.S. military and U.S. Department of Homeland Security, is doing the right thing. What about drug smuggling? The following October of last year, then Attorney General Jeff Sessions announced that he was targeting 45 leaders, financiers, transporters, and suppliers of the Cartel Jalisco Nueva Generacion, CJNG. Handed down 15 indictments for bringing cocaine, meth, and fentanyl-laced heroin into the United States. They were bringing it in at a rate of 10 tons per month, netting a single cartel $12.5 billion a year. Military capabilities? Back in 2015, that same cartel, the Cartel Jalisco Nueva Generacion, CJNG, that cartel used an RPG, a rocket-propelled grenade, to shoot down a military helicopter, and it shot down a police helicopter. U.S. Border Patrol agents have spotted drones capable of smuggling, and quite frankly capable of doing terrorist attacks too, flying near the Mexican border. You know, the bottom line is this. The border is just a euphemism. Drug cartels that the DEA has labeled the greatest criminal drug threat to the United States for 4 years in a row have established well-traveled routes going to Phoenix, Los Angeles, Denver, New York, Chicago, Oklahoma City, Houston, New Orleans, Detroit, Atlanta. They have inundated America with life-threatening drugs that originate in Asia to the point where Americans are now more likely to die from a drug overdose than you are from a car accident. That problem has gotten so serious that the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, cites drug overdoses as one of the primary factors for the longest decline in life expectancy since America was afflicted with World War I and the Spanish flu pandemic back in 1915. Mexico is becoming a failed state right on our border. What are our plans? What are we going to do? Shouldn't the reality that we have a conglomeration of extremely well-armed, well-organized, hostile entities actually on our border, shouldn't that be our foremost national security consideration? When you think about it, the cartels are so deadly that Mexico is well on its way toward breaking last year's record total of more than 29,000 murders. The cartels are so sophisticated. They have diversified. Think about it. You talk about a business enterprise. The cartels have diversified their economic activities into things like garments and textiles, mining, logging, shipping, oil and gas production, industrial. Oh, speaking of oil and gas production, do you suppose the cartels are doing fracking? They're into industrial agriculture. They're actually into offshore commercial fishing. They are so emboldened that they have carried out executions in this country. They have engaged in shootouts with American law enforcement people, and they have partnered with MS-13. So why haven't the cartels been designated as a terrorist organization? You can do a web search, and you can see that America's ruling class, Republicans and Democrats alike, have been talking the talk for, 9 or 10 years now. There's a 2011 article that lays bare part of the problem, ideology. Like the terrorists that attacked us on 9/11, the Obama administration and Democrats insisted that the cartels were simply a law enforcement problem and were not a military problem. Don't you think that we maybe want to ask the Mexican president, are the cartels a military problem Or are they just a law enforcement problem? Because it seems that they just defeated your own military. Since then, back in 2011, we have embraced on this stupid verbal posturing, transnational criminal organizations. That's a favorite word of Homeland Security. They use that to describe the cartels. But the problem is the real resistance to the designation as a terrorist organization is really simple and really cynical. If you designate the cartels as terrorists, that could serve as a maneuver to help the president gain political leverage for his controversial wall. Oh, I didn't say that. CNN columnist Tim Lloyd said that last March. Oh, let's don't designate. See, everything goes back to Trump. We have an almost, at least on the path to becoming a failed state on our southern border. And all the media can do is, one, not report on it. And two, if they do report on it, well, we can't really talk about it because that might help the president. That same CNN columnist went on to say this. While Mexican cartels may satisfy the baseline criteria for foreign terrorist organization designation, the resultant impact could introduce crippling costs for the United States banking industry, which is already spending over $25 billion a year on anti-money laundering compliance, according to a LexisNexis search. In other words, the same American public, you and me, that bailed out the banks in 2008 to the tune of what, $700 billion in the TARP program, and the commitment to come up with another $16.8 trillion? We should fret over the costs associated with money laundering that the banks themselves have facilitated? Money laundering that the Justice Department says the American division of HSBC Bank did for Mexican drug cartels in the staggering amount of $881 billion. It's getting close to $1 trillion. But if you want to talk about crippling costs, 72,000 Americans died from drug overdoses in 2017, as in more than the amount of casualties America sustained in Vietnam and Iraq combined. There's a columnist by the name of Sumatra Mitra, writes, Americans should know that they do not have a functioning nation state across their southern border, and that should keep every sane person awake at night. But I've come to this conclusion. I don't think that sanity is in it. We don't think about sane or rational things anymore, because the ruling class in this country have become so corrupt that, they'll express indignation about this administration's failure to protect the Syrian border. Well, our border remains wide open. And the media lapdogs insist that everything related to illegal immigration is a manufactured crisis, and we don't want to do anything because that might help Donald Trump's reelection. They'll allow Americans to be tortured, raped, murdered by the cartels and the gangs, and insist that it's tolerable because illegals commit wholly avoidable crimes at lesser rates than native-born Americans. But as you've heard me say a bazillion times, those are wholly avoidable crimes. Illegal aliens may commit crimes at lesser rates than native-born Americans. But every crime that an illegal alien commits is a crime that would have not been committed but for that illegal alien being in this country. And those same politicians, Republicans and Democrats alike, they're going to sit back, they're going to dither while these cartels metastasize to the point of anarchy in a country that we share a border with that is almost 2,000 miles long. A failed state on our southern border. It may not be there yet. But if I just told you, without giving you the details, that the cartels defeated the Mexican military, that alone should be enough to say, what are we doing? Where are our priorities? And what are we doing to get ready for if those cartels are able to actually destroy the Mexican government, the Mexican infrastructure, banking, electricity, power, water, everything else? And all of those 100 million plus Mexicans start seeking refuge in a safe place. You know, I think the distance between us and the ruling elites is getting wider every single day. They talk about national security. They talk about homeland security. And I'm sure that all of the people that do the planning ops in DOD and DHS are watching this unfolding and are making plans. Yes, in that sense, I actually trust them. But the political leaders, I don't trust at all. The media, even less. I bet you've never even heard this story about the cartels defeating the Mexican military. A failed state on our southern border. Thanks for listening. You know the drill. Don't go away. All I ask is that you go to iTunes, that you go to the iHeart app. There's a place where you can copy the link to this podcast, and I'd be ever so grateful if you would share that link on your social media platforms, on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, wherever. Email it, send it to people, friends, whatever. Help me spread the podcast. And I'll talk to you again Monday morning.